Okay. I got my good friend here, Congressman and Chairman Larson, Chairman of the Social Security Committee. He represents Connecticut's 1st District. Currently in his 12th term in Congress, he sits on the powerful House Ways and Means Committee and is the Chairman of the Social Security Subcommittee. That aside, I don't need a piece of paper to talk about my friend. We've been working with him for about 3 years. I've been working with him about 3 years in the Alliance for a number of years because he's a fighter. He's out there fighting for Social Security. He's fighting to expand. He doesn't talk about protecting Social Security. He talks about expanding Social Security. He is always on the offense. He has invited us down to speak at hearings to voice our opinions. He has a coalition of advocates in the retirement world, that he brings together and keeps them abreast, and we keep fighting. Now, I know there's been a lot of talk about the House and protecting Social Security. And again, this guy is the man. He's the man. He's been fighting every day. He's not interested in happy talk. He's interested in results. He fights. He doesn't care who he's fighting. So please give a warm welcome to our friend, my friend, the Chairman of the Social Security Committee, the guy that's going to bring Social Security expansion to us, no matter what it takes, Chairman John Larson. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Robert. I got to bring you on the road with me for those effusive introductions, etc. Good to see so many friends out here, including Betty Marafino from my home state of Connecticut. And what's that Chinese proverb? May you live in interesting times. And as the previous speaker was indicating, it looks as though the Republicans just announced that they have 217, and in all likelihood they'll probably be in the majority. I think that's something we have to recognize. Mathematically, we are still alive, but I'd say we're probably on life support at this junction. But I want to thank the Alliance as well for sticking together, and also prevail upon you. We have to be extraordinarily strategic in this lame duck. And we have to be strategic so that we can both protect and enhance the president. And we were particularly grateful that the president, along with in so many other races, was out on the stump. And what was he highlighting? What were he and President Obama? What did they turn the closing arguments of this campaign into? Social Security and Medicare. Our erstwhile colleagues on the other side of the aisle gave us a bonus by saying, A, they were going to hold raising the debt ceiling hostage so they could cut Social Security and Medicare. Now, that took a little nerve, I have to say, on the part of Mr. McCarthy's part, but I don't know whether it was nerve or stupidity, but it currently played right into the hands, and I don't think I've heard a more effective speech on Social Security than the one President Obama gave in Pennsylvania. And all the more reason that we have to, during the lame duck, bring this legislation to a vote. Otherwise, between the cloture vote in the Senate and the Republicans with a narrow margin in the House, we won't be hearing about Social Security for yet another 2 years. So we have this moment, this window. I implore all of you to call Senate and House leadership and say, take up Social Security 2100. It's paid in full. It repeals weapon GPO, as was mentioned. But also, as Robert mentioned, there hasn't been an enhancement to Social Security in 51 years. Now, the vast majority in the room are retirees already. So you know this. You know that Social Security has not been enhanced since Richard Nixon was President of the United States. A loaf of bread costs 72 cents. A lot has changed, and a lot needs to be done. And when you consider what's going on around the world, we're still in the midst of a global pandemic that set off enormous supply chain issues that set in motion global inflation, followed up with the events that transpired on January the 6th, back-to-back shocks to what's happening here in America, followed up still by the largest land war in Europe in 75 years, with two nations, one a controller of oil, the other a controller of wheat, again disrupting supply chains and contributing to inflation. And who, might I ask, has been most impacted by the pandemic? People over the age of 65. Of the just over 1 million people that have passed away, 756,000 are over the age of 65. And who's the group most hurt by inflation? People on fixed income. And who are they? The more than 65 million Americans that are on Social Security. And for so many of our fellow Americans, Social Security is the only benefit that they have. It used to be that we had to go back to 1929 and the Great Depression and to demonstrate what could happen when you lost everything. We only have to go back as far as 2008, 2009, during the Great Recession, when people saw their 401k become a 101k. During that same time period, Social Security never missed a payment. Not a pension payment, not a spousal payment, not a dependent payment, not a disability payment. And oh, by the way, more veterans rely on Social Security disability than they do on VA. The short of it is this. It is the nation's #1 insurance program, the #1 anti-poverty program for the elderly, the #1 anti-poverty program for children. And these guys are talking about holding the debt ceiling hostage so that they can make cuts at a time when the programs need to be enhanced, with more than 5 million of our fellow Americans, most of them women, who are getting below poverty level checks from the wealthiest nation on the face of the earth, at a time when the other side is saying, well, we need to have that money to give tax cuts to the wealthiest 1%. Oh, they got, $2 trillion in tax cuts in 2017? 83% that went to the nation's wealthiest 1%. Aren't you happy for that 17% of crumbs that were able to trickle their way down to you? You know, don't you feel grateful for that benevolence that they were able to bestow on you, and saying, oh, everybody participated in this tax cut? Yeah, everybody did, but proportionately, you know what the drill is. 5 million of our fellow Americans get below poverty level checks from the federal government. So when Robert says that we're out to enhance the bill, we are. It's long overdue. It's been 51 years since Congress has done anything to enhance the bill. In fact, the last time Congress did anything substantive was in 1983. And they did balance out and create a greater longevity within Social Security, but they did that by cutting benefits. Now, admittedly, it was Ronald Reagan and, God rest his soul, Senator Dole, and of course Tip O'Neill. And Tip O'Neill argued to keep the program intact, etc. And Reagan and Dole's compromise, yeah, but we're going to raise the age. That just went into effect, the last phase of it, this January. This January, something that happened 39 years ago. Again, 39 years, 51 years without any enhancements, 39 years without any substantive action on the nation's #1 anti-poverty program for the elderly. And now, in the midst of this pandemic, what Martin Luther King would say is the fierce urgency of now, it's time to act and respond. However, strategically, knowing how close our margins were and everything else, but really, is it asking too much of the United States Congress, the House and the Senate, to vote? What do we, swear of oath of allegiance to the Constitution for? If we're not there, like all of you were and still are, doing your job. Our job is to legislate and to vote on behalf of our constituents. So I'm urging you to prevail upon and unleash all the organizations and say, vote, Democrats, while you still have the opportunity. Vote to make sure that the debt ceiling is lifted and it can't be held hostage. Vote to enhance Social Security. The races are over. There's no more political excuses. What the people want to know is who's accountable, who's with us. And the only way you can tell is with a vote. Now, the Republicans say, oh my God, we would never cut Social Security. And then you read all their reports, whether it's Rick Scott out of Florida, whether it's Mr. Johnson, Senator Johnson, both calling to end Social Security as we know it, and the Republican Study Committee, 154 members of the Republicans who proposed a 20% across the board cut and 20 separate individual cuts. And Andrew Biggs in testimony, where both Betty and Robert have testified, said we still are in favor of privatization of Social Security. They could do better. They cannot do better. Number one, everybody should be proud of the fact that this is the most effective governmental program that we have. #1 anti-poverty program for the elderly and for children. And it also has what we call a 99% loss ratio. What that means, that's insurance lingo, and what that means is this, is that it's run with less than 1% administrative costs. There's no other governmental agency that does that. There is no private sector insurance company that does that or even comes close. It's Social Security. It is a great vision that Roosevelt had, and it still works in there. And the only thing that's stopping it from doing what it should be doing in an accelerated fashion is the United States Congress voting. The time for excuse is over. This doesn't need any more studies like the Republicans are talking about, selecting 7 people, going off someplace and coming back and then having an up or down vote. How about you have an up or down vote after you have a public hearing, after you discuss out in the open what it is that you're proposing, and let the public actually judge based on the merits of your proposal and by the votes that you have taken. So as you can probably tell, we're pretty charged up about the fact that we need to get a vote and need to get it in this lame duck. Now, I recognize that leadership has a lot of things on their agenda, but I would dare say that both in terms of this past election and especially as we project out into the future and look at the next election cycle, there was a reason that President Biden and President Obama were out on the stump talking about Social Security. Why? Because it is a kitchen table issue. Why? Because it does matter. Because there have been people getting below poverty level checks. Because there hasn't been an increase in more than 51 years. Because there are people that are wrongly penalized because of WEP and GPO who need to be brought back into the system. We have to end the waiting period on disability. We have to expand benefits for widows and for people who end up in a situation where grandmothers end up having to raise their children under Social Security. The programs need to be enhanced across the board because it is America's #1 insurance program. And that's what it is. They keep on telling everybody this is an entitlement. It is not an entitlement. Everybody is entitled to it because they paid into it. And how do we know this? Because they look at their pay stub and it says FICA, Federal Insurance Contribution. It's not even a tax, but the Republicans call it a tax and an entitlement. It's Federal Insurance Contribution. Whose? Yours. Yours. People have paid for this. This is an earned benefit, not an entitlement. And that's why Roosevelt remains genius to this day, knowing that every American would be contributing into that program, as 182 million Americans do currently. 65 million Americans are recipients. This is the greatest insurance program ever devised by a governmental entity, and it works. The only problem is Congress hasn't done its job in enhancing it. This is not anything the president can do with executive order or that the Supreme Court is going to adjudicate. It takes Congress to do it, and you have to hold Congress's feet to the fire. No list about excuses and litany. Say, all we're asking you to do is what we send you to Washington for. That's vote. Thank you so much. Thank you for all your effort. And if you want me to answer questions?
I have a question from online. Has anything happened with that bill, your Social Security 2100, in the U.S. Senate yet?
Yes, both Dick Blumenthal and Chris Van Hollen are sponsors of the bill in the U.S. Senate. There are several other bills that are in the Senate, but in conversations with Bernie Sanders and others and Elizabeth Warren, et cetera, we're all together on this, and we believe that any proposal coming forward should go back to regular order and go to conference and produce an end product that ends up on President Biden's desk and is signed into law. So yes, there is Senator Blumenthal and Senator Van Hollen lead the proposal in the United States Senate.
That's it? Okay.
Well, listen, I can't thank Robert enough for, and you know, probably one of the most compelling lines that I've used was his description of having to watch people he knows put food back up on the shelf because they can't afford it. And the only reason they can't is because the United States Congress hasn't acted on the most effective and efficient insurance plan that's paid for by the people, whose trust fund is secured, and the only thing preventing it from being enhanced so it helps people out during this time is Congress voting. Go after them.